How y'all doing? Doing good? Let's go. Let's go. Welcome to church. If you are new, a special welcome to you. My name is Mark. I am one of the pastors around here. Good to have you. If you have a Bible, Acts chapter 20 is where we are. If you don't have a Bible, we always give you one of these bulletins on your way in. Love to see you track along with the verses that we're unpacking today. Literally what we do is we gather as a church, if you're new to church, and we sing some songs of praise to God. We unpack some theology in the context of song, and then we open up our Bibles and we go chapter by chapter through it in this church, talk about Jesus, talk about the birth of the church in this series, which is called Unstoppable, which is the book of Acts, which is the book in the Bible where the church got started. God did some crazy, amazing things in the lives of people, crazy miracles, and we believe that that wasn't just some historical thing, but that's still happening today, right? Right? There is still healing and love and salvation and things happening. And we're going to see one of those stories today in Acts chapter 20. So here's where it starts. Chapter 20, verse 1, when the uproar had ended. So this is in reference, you guys here last year when Pastor Kevin Thompson preached? Right, Acts chapter 19, all the people gathered in Ephesus. There was this massive amphitheater in Ephesus, and it held 50,000 people, and it was this huge echoey amphitheater, and they all got there. When Paul started preaching the gospel, they hated the fact that he was calling out the idols of the city. He was saying, you worship Artemis, which was this statue back then, and they had all their worship in their hearts and their minds all went to it, kind of like us, and Kevin talked about this. In the modern world, we have idols, money, power, beauty, family, whatever it is that you derive all your significance and meaning from. And the gospel, of course, challenges all the idols of our hearts. So the Apostle Paul shows up to Ephesus and he says, okay, you got to get rid of this. You actually have to give yourself to Jesus. And the city hates it. The city gathered in chants for 2 hours. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And we do this in our own life. We don't like when the gospel challenges the idols of our hearts, right? We love money, we love power, we love sex, whatever it is. And we go, no, I want to hold on to the way that I do life. The gospel goes, no. And what we do is we stop our ears and we chant, great is Artemis of the Ephesians, or whatever, great is Mark, and I don't want to listen of the Sacramentonians, whatever, and I don't want to hear the beauty of the gospel challenge my life, and so I try to ignore it. And Paul calls it out. There is a writer years ago who said, the only way to get people to not challenge the powers of the empire and the way that things are done is just make sure you feed them and make sure you keep them entertained. If you're well fed and well entertained, you're not going to challenge anything. And this is what we are, where we're at in our culture. We make sure that we're fed and we make sure that we entertain you. Sports, scroll, Instagram, whatever. And if you're distracted enough, you're never going to challenge anything. You're not going to want to do real revolutionary work. And this is exactly what they were doing. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Paul cared enough to not let them sit in their idolatry. Paul actually cared enough, and this is what's beautiful about the church. Oftentimes, people don't like the church, right? They look at the church and they say it's filled with hypocrites and bad people, and it's judgmental. You know, Christopher Hitchens years ago, the great atheist thinker, was like, I hate the church. Religion is poison to the world. Religion is bad for the world. The church is full of messed up people, hypocritical people, judgmental people, to which I say, yes, it is. Amen. It's full of people like you complete losers, right? Hypocrites, narcissists, liars. But that's why you're here. Because you're saying, I am not perfect. I need the grace of Jesus, right? That's why you're here. Of course you're a bunch of morons. I tell you that. Listen, I tell you that every week. Listen, if you guys find a perfect church, if you can look around and Google and find and walk in and find the perfect church, do not start attending there because you will ruin it. You are a wreck. But here's the beautiful thing about the church, guys. The church doesn't just sit back and let the world continue in its idolatry. The church rises up when there's sex trafficking, when there's poverty. Why are the youth going to Mexicali in a couple weeks? Why? Because it's saying there's poverty in a place. There's kiddos who need to be served and loved in the name of Jesus. So we're going to go. We're not just going to stop our ears. We're not just going to do nothing. We're going to actually do something about it, right? And this is what sociologist by the name of Rodney Stark, he points this out. He says a whole bunch of people critique the church, they criticize religion, they say religion's bad for the world, but actually the data points in the opposite direction. Rodney Stark says this: religious people are the primary source of secular charitable funds that benefit victims of misfortune, whatever their beliefs. They dominate the ranks of blood donors and other pro-social behaviors, are much less likely to commit crimes, far more likely to donate their money and time to socially beneficial programs and be active in civic affairs. The impact of religious people on volunteer alone is an estimated $47 billion annually in the United States alone. Urban stats from present day back to 1920 showed the higher a city's church membership rate, the lower its burglary, larceny, robbery, assault, and homicide rates. The church is good for the world, right? The church, if you come to church on a Sunday, you are just less statistically likely to go around and start stabbing people, all right? Or to use your money to do something great, to use your time, to use your energy for something great. You are far more likely to be selfless if you attend church, if you're a religious person, because you know you're not living for just the 77 years that you've got now. You're living for the 77 billion after that. And if what I'm gonna do right now is give up time and money and energy, but I'm gonna, even if I have to die for it, this is what's gonna happen. So people beat up on the church, but they shouldn't, because the church is the thing that's actually loving and serving the world. The church is also, by the way, the bride of Jesus. This is what the book of Revelation says, that the church is called the bride of Christ. And he's gonna come back one day for his bride. And we're gonna get married to Jesus in a marriage ceremony that's gonna be the greatest. It's gonna be incredible. And so here's the thing. You critique the church, you're critiquing who? The bride of Jesus, which you should be nervous about. I don't know, guys, if you listen to just dudes sit around and criticize your wife, there's never a time where I'm sitting around with a bunch of dudes who are like, yeah, Erin's such a loser. And I'm like, yeah, totally she is. No, if a guy said that about Erin, I'd be like, bam, right? And realize Jesus is coming back on a horse with a sword. What do you think he's gonna do with that sword? Sit around and let you bash his wife? He's gonna be like Will Smith at the Oscars. Keep my wife's name out your mouth. Can't critique the church and get away with it, gang. So, yes, it's full of hypocrites. Yes, it's full of messed up people. Yes, it's full of liars. But there are a bunch of people that need the grace of Jesus. So there's an uproar. And then Paul sent for the disciples, and after what? Encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. Here's the next big idea. It's that encouragement changes the world. Encouragement. 3 times in this text, actually, the word encouragement is used. If you got your notes, verse 1, verse 2, and then later in verse 12, the whole passage ends when it says greatly comforted. It's the Greek word for encouragement. Same Greek word, parakletos. It means to come alongside and call something positive out of a person. Para, come alongside. So here's the thing. We live in a culture and a time where we pull people down, where we criticize people, where we gossip about people, because it's way easier to be a critical person. When you go online and you see somebody online, oftentimes the default setting of online comments is negative, right? Rarely it's just positive. It's usually because we tend to feel smarter when we're being critical. If you're around a group of people and all you are is a positive person and you're an encourager, people tend to think, well, you might not be that bright. But if you're constantly critical and you're finding the negative in everything, then people think you're smart. And so this is what we do. It feels good to feel smart. So we sit around with people and we criticize other people, and it feels really good because then we feel really good about ourselves. And so this is what happens. It's addictive to be critical, to be a discourager, right? This is why if you've gone out with dinner, let's say, hypothetically, I know it wouldn't happen in this room, but probably the last service. They would go out with their friends for dinner, and they got Joe, and Joe's been a real jerk, and so they sit around, they talk about Joe. Joe did this, Joe did this, Joe did this, and the 4 of them sit around. Well, a couple weeks go by, and that felt really good. And so what they do is they call those people back up, and they go back out, and they talk about Joe again, because it's addictive to be critical. Instead of stopping and praying for Joe, they talk about Joe and criticize him. Instead of speaking to Joe, they speak about Joe, because it's way easier to be a discourager and to be critical. So here's the thing though, the world needs encouragement, right? It is depressed, It is alone, it is isolated, it is anxious, and we are being called, like the Apostle Paul, to be an encourager because he knows that's the way to move the kingdom of God forward, to be an encourager. I'm reading a book right now called Likeable Leader. The whole thesis is, in order to be a leader, in order to have impact on the world, you have to be likable. If you're a jerk, if you're mean, if you're nasty, if you're judgmental, if you're critical, nobody will follow you. Right? And this happens, the whole book opens with a bunch of stats from the University of California that show that if you are likable, your doctor will pay more attention to you and find things that are wrong with you that they wouldn't have otherwise found. If you're just a patient that ticks doctors off, guess what? They don't want to spend any time with you. They're like, I don't know, he's got cancer. Figure it out. Guy's a jerk anyways, right? But when people are likable, they tend to get better doctor care. When you get pulled over, likable people tend to get less tickets. Likable people, actually in a court of law, this has been shown statistically that a jury will give likable defendants less prison time. So some of you need to write this down. This is gonna be important for you at some point in your life. All right, you're gonna need that information that I just said, and you're gonna be sitting there going, what did he say about that prison time again? You gotta be likable, man. You have to be likable in order to have impact. So, encouraging people is a way to move things forward. So, Pastor Ray has this great book called The Hope Quotient, and he talks about the opening story is his daughter comes home from school, sits him down and says, I have this project for school. It's the question of, I have to interview a leader. And her first question at the gate was, what does every single leader need in life? And he said, I didn't even have to think about the answer. The answer is encouragement. Every single one of us actually needs to be encouraged. You guys ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Right? Christmas movie, right? It's on every year. When I was watching it this year, I realized the genius of the opening scene of It's a Wonderful Life. Of course, George Bailey wants to end his life. He's so depressed. He doesn't know what to do anymore. And these two angels that are kind of represented in these like blob, like just kind of lights in the sky, and they're talking. And one of the angels is the leader, Franklin, and he needs to call Clarence over so that Clarence can get his wings. And he's gonna assign Clarence to George Bailey to go down and help him. And here's how the conversation goes. Clarence shows up and he says, you sent for me, sir? And Franklin says, yes, Clarence, a man down on earth needs our help. Clarence says, splendid. Is he sick? Franklin says, no, worse. He's discouraged. George Bailey is gonna end his life, not because he's sick, but because he's discouraged. And I need you to go and encourage him. Encouragement is literally, for some people, it is going to be the thing that gives them life. This is why at every birthday we have as a family or when we go out with friends, we sit around the table and we do affirmations of the person whose birthday it is. Do you do this? Right? Someone's turning 60. We're gonna sit around that table after the dinner. I don't care if there's 30 people, and every single person is going to look at that person and say, here's how you've impacted my life. Here's what I've noticed about you this year. Here's what you have done for me. And you tell stories to those people because here's what happens. You don't tell those stories until they're dead. And you're standing at their funeral telling stories about how they encourage you and change your life, but they're not around to hear it. What does it look like to affirm and encourage people in who they are? So here, I have an assignment for you guys this week. I rarely give you anything to do, all right? You guys are, you get off most weeks of having to do anything, but I'm gonna ask that you do something this week. Here's what you're gonna do. Here's your assignment. I want you to come back 7 days from now, and every day between now and next Sunday, you have to encourage somebody, like an intentional, not just a general, so we're talking text message, DM, email, Lord forbid you call somebody. And you encourage them, but it has to be specific. It's not just, hey, you're a good bro, all right? I'm talking about, hey, Dave, thank you for being this and this, and remember that time you did this for me, thank you. I'm just wanting to encourage you this week and make sure, imagine every single one of us in this room did this. Right? How you could impact people. So every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way to next Sunday, encourage intentionally one person and see how you can impact the world. This is what we're talking about. Because here's the thing, guys. Here's a sentence that I thought up yesterday, and this is worth remembering. You can't change the world by minding your own business. Isn't that good? That's tweetable right there. Just put my name on the end of it, and we're fine. But if I see you out there telling people, it dawned on me, I'm taking credit for that because I thought of it, all right? You can't, listen to this again. You can't change the world by minding your own business. Okay, here's what I mean. So this past week, my wife took my youngest daughter, Isabella, took her on a little trip, 4 days. They went to Palm Springs for a bit, and then they drove into Disneyland because her friend hadn't been there in 10 years. And so she's like, okay, let's do a special encouragement trip for this girl. Take her to Disneyland, hang out. Okay, great. So they're at Disneyland one day, and of course now I have a honey-do list of nonsense that I have to do around the house. So I'm cutting weeds and putting garbage away and whatever. And so I called up Aaron, and I said, hey, I don't know what to do with your lawnmower. I don't know where to put it. Whatever. And she's like, yeah, well, this is where you put it. Well, I'm like, okay, fine. But I hung up, and literally, like 30 seconds later, our youngest daughter dings on the family text string, and she says, Mom just saved a baby again. Now, the again part of it is because 4 or 5 years ago, we were all coming back from Uganda on a mission trip there. We're there in the airport. We're standing in line, and my wife looks over and sees this woman, and she's got a baby in the front of her, like on a baby Bjorn, and the baby it's dying. It's choked out like this, and the mom can't see it, and the baby is blue. Yeah, like totally blue. And Aaron sees the baby, jumps over like the stanchions of the airport, runs, takes the baby off this mom. The mom's screaming, whatever. Aaron takes the baby like, I don't know what she did. That's not technical, but whatever you do. And the baby comes back to life and gets the color back, starts breathing again. Aaron's just like, okay. And then it's just like, okay. And everyone's security everywhere. We're just like, all right, boarding pass, please. And we just get on the airplane, fly home. Kind of crazy. So then I guess what happened right after I hung up the phone, and it happened just before I called her. She looks across, and again, there's this baby, and it's choking, and it's turned color. And so she jumps over the stanchion at Disneyland, grabs the baby, gives the Heimlich, breathes and whatever. Saves the baby. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Disney. Mickey Mouse is like, whatever. And saves the baby's life. And then she goes on with her day. She never even, by the way, when I said, where does the lawnmower go? She never even said anything. She's like, lawnmower goes by, hang up. She's busy saving a baby, then lawnmower. So my youngest is like, she saved the baby again. Now, here's the thing, guys. This is the difference. You can't change the world if you mind your own business. See, my wife doesn't mind her own business. Now, here's the difference between Aaron and me. I would have looked at that baby at Disneyland and gone, I don't want to interfere. I don't know. Let's just go on the roller coaster, honey. Whatever. I would have just gone, I don't know what's going on with the baby. Maybe it likes to do that with its face. I don't know. I would just come up with some nonsensical nonsense, and I would stay out of people's life because that's how I am. I just don't want to meddle. But here's the thing. You can't change the world if you don't meddle. You can't change the world if you're not willing to go outside, get into people's lives, and do what? Encourage them. Speak life into them. Be willing to step out, encourage, and do something that's outside of your own comfort in order to encourage and change the world. That is the beauty of what Paul is doing here. Now, okay, verse 2. That was verse 1. He traveled through that area. Okay, this is the Apostle Paul now, the hero of our story, speaking many words of encouragement, again, to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months because some Jews had plotted against him just as he was about to sail for Syria because they don't like what he's talking about with the gospel, and he decided to go back through Macedonia. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy also, and Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. These men went on ahead and waited for us at Troas, but we sailed to Philippi after the festival of unleavened bread, and the 5 days joined the others at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. Now, here's the thing. I can guarantee you none of you have that verse on your fridge. And you know why? Because it bores you. It's a boring verse. Because see, Christians like the verses that make them feel stuff, right? They don't like these boring Troas and Sopater and Tychonitis. This is why I fall asleep in church. It's so boring. See, Christians like the verses that God loves you and it makes me feel. But I'll tell you who likes these verses. True skeptics. University professors. See, some of you are going to go to university in the next year or two, and you're going to get up and you're going to hear a professor say, the Bible's a joke, the Bible's not legitimate, the Bible has no historical point. And what you misunderstand is that these kind of verses are exactly what you need in those moments. You see, it's the boring verses in the Bible that make it legitimate. Most religions are just sacred books telling you about esoteric philosophy and religious ideas about God and heaven and hell and your soul, but they don't root anything in history. The Bible goes out of its way constantly. Luke is a historian and a doctor. It constantly goes out of its way and says, hey, listen, I want you to understand this is actually what happened. This is rooted in history. This isn't the making of a religion. This isn't a mythology. This is history. This is why Luke, do you know Richard Bauckham, who's a British scholar, he talks about the idea that the reason you get all these boring names is because Eutychus and Trophimus, you know why you get those boring names? He says it's so that these people are still alive. Go back and ask them, did this really happen? That's why when you're reading it, it tells you, oh, this guy is the son of this guy. This guy's the son of that guy, because those people are still alive. And the Bible writers want you to go back and actually deal with the history. This is so important. So Luke goes out of his way to root everything in history, so much so that he does this. In Luke and Acts, Luke identifies 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands without error. He's giving you history. And so Nelson Glueck, who's a Jewish archaeologist, says, it may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever contradicted the Bible. That's what you want. You want those boring verses. Those boring verses are the ones that root this whole thing in actual history. Okay, verse 7. On the first day of the week, this is the first time, by the way, that they've said this phrase, and this means that the church has started to gather on the first day of the week versus Friday, Saturday. So it used to be Jewish religion, Friday night to Saturday night, that's when you gather, that was the Sabbath. Now, for some reason, these Christians started gathering on the first day of the week, Sunday, right? Which, of course, commemorates the resurrection of Jesus, meaning something apocalyptic and life-changing happened in Jesus, so much so that this thousands of years history that was always Friday night, Saturday night, Friday night, Saturday, all of a sudden becomes first day of the week. Something crazy happened. And they came together to break bread. Of course, they're eating a meal, they're hanging out. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. Now, I love this. Here's the Apostle Paul, been working all day. He was a tent maker, and yet he's preaching the gospel till midnight. He's sitting in a room teaching the Bible until midnight. Here's the thing. We give God an hour and 15 minutes of our time a week, and we think that's good enough. The Apostle Paul's sitting there working till midnight. How many of you know you can't change the world in 1 hour and 15 minutes a week? The Apostle Paul's grinding till midnight. Some of you are so lazy. Not only in your faith journey, but in like just your life. The Apostle Paul would work tirelessly. So I'm a dad of 3 daughters, 18, 16, and 14. And part of my job is to be a jerk. And what that means sometimes is I gotta tell them, you gotta get up, you gotta do your chores, you gotta take out the garbage, you gotta clean up the dog stuff, you gotta do that. Why do you hate me? You know, whatever. So I sent them this Instagram reel last week that I saw, and it was this great reel about this father. He's sitting in this garage, and there's nice music behind it. And it simply said, your dad wasn't trying to be a jerk. He just wanted you to succeed in a world full of lazy people with no work ethic, right? That's the world we live in, man. See, when you look back at your father, wasn't he a jerk sometimes? He's like, you better get up. And I'm like, my kids, I can't believe it. I'm like, it's noon. No one changed the world waking up at noon. So what happens is we get lazy in the church. We think, this is what's beautiful about what we do as a church. We do these things and we say to ourselves, I don't want to, work too hard, or I come to a place where I retire in life. When we do breakaway, all these kids run around, thousands of kids on this campus. Question is, when we did breakaway at the church I planted in Vancouver, I remember talking to this woman one time. There was like 200 kids there. We had just got started, so we needed everybody. And this woman's there, and I'm like, okay, you're going to serve a breakaway? And she's like, oh, no. I'm 55 years old. I'm retired from that. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, no, I did that when I had young kids I served at Breakaway, but not anymore. I'm out of that stage now. Now I'm retired from all that. I put in all my years back then. It's like, wait, no. You're thinking about this all wrong, man. You're the 60-year-old woman that should be serving at Breakaway. You know what those mothers with small kids are like? They're so tired, right? They don't even know what you got to help save them. Right, they're up all night. Now they gotta go to Breakaway. Some kid's like, what about Noah? It's like, I don't know, kid, eat your Rice Krispie Square. I don't care, I just wanna sleep. We need the 60-year-olds to step up and serve the mothers and the fathers and the kiddos. You never retire from ministry. You die with your boots on, right? The last service, front row, there was Doug. How many of you know who Doug is? Right? And Dougie, man. Dougie's the best. 75 years old. This guy serves every morning with kids ministry. Every Breakaway, he's there morning till night. Every youth event, Doug. And front row every Sunday, taking notes, jacked up, wearing a Canadian t-shirt to encourage me. And I got Dougie up here and I say, tell him your story, man. This guy's jacked up. And I said, you're gonna die with your boots on. Hopefully not soon, but he will die with his boots on, serving Jesus. And that's what every single one of us should do. And some of us are lazy. And so Paul's doing this thing till midnight. Then verse 8, there were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. When I get to heaven, I'm gonna ask Luke, why that verse? What does this mean? I have a theory, but I'm not sure why he tells us this. So, seated in a window was a young man. Now, hold on to this for a quick second. How many of you know that God uses young people to change the world? Right? The young man. Do you know, we in our culture, we cast disparagements on young people. We think they're dumb. We think they don't understand. We think they don't have good work ethic. We think they're a lost generation. Let me tell you, I was 29 years old when I planted our church in Vancouver. 29 years old. Now I'm mid-40s. I look at a 29-year-old, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I mean, look at you. You've done nothing with your life. I'm like, who am I to start looking back at 29? This is who God uses. God, do you know every revival, every renewal through church history has all started with young people? It's the young lit on fire with the Spirit of God that can change the world. And I've seen it with my own eyes. This is what God does. He takes the young people and he does something with them. You know why? C.S. Lewis tells us why. He says, the young are far more willing to die for a cause than the old. Why? Because y'all got too much to lose. Think about, God shows up and he asks you, you're rolling in your mid-40s, your 50s, you got a job, you got a house, you got the nice car, and God shows up and he says, I want you to do something radical with your life. I want you to move. And you're like, move? I'm at a 3% interest rate. Kim, what do you mean move? 3% and God goes, no, I want you to move, man. You're gonna move to a different state, to a different country. I want you to serve Christ. You're like, no, I got a good comfy job. I just got the office. I got my good, did I mention, Lord, hold on. Did I mention the interest rate of my house? It's at 3%. I sell my house, now I'm at a 7%, now I'm poor. And God shows up to a 22-year-old and says, I want you to do something great. And what do? They go, why? Because they have nothing to hold on to. They have nothing that has grasped them so that they can't let go of it at the drop of a hat and do what God has called them to do. This is why he uses the young. And we need to learn from that. We need to recognize that God needs to use you when you're young at heart, no matter what age you are, that you would recognize. So here's Eutychus. Now, this guy Eutychus had worked all day, and then he shows up and he's sitting there and Paul's talking. He was sinking into a deep sleep. That's my theory on why, by the way, he tells us there was lamps, because he's saying the room is hot. Okay, the room is warm. This young Eutychus kid had been working all day. Now he shows up and he falls into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. This sounds like a Kevin Thompson sermon. All right, so He was in the room when I made that joke earlier, and he stood up and he left for a full minute. It was great. So Paul's talking on, and when he's sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up, what? Dead. So here's Eutychus, and it's a warm room, and he falls asleep. Now here's this young man named Eutychus. We cast aspersions on the young. We don't think, and here he is. He's like, we look at the young as if they can't do anything. So this week, part of my young daughter, 14 years old, part of her time was, she was a friend of ours, had lent us a house in Palm Springs, and it was like this little gated community, and so they got golf carts down there. And so she and her little friend get on the golf cart, and they drive over to the friend's house, and they pick something out, and then they're driving the golf cart back to the house, and behind them, they notice that the security guard for this little thing, this little area, this gated community, is driving behind them, and he has his little siren on, all right? And he's trying to pull them over. And of course, my daughter's like, I don't know who this guy is, so she just keeps driving, right? And he's like, pull over. She's like, stranger danger, right? She's like, so they're in a high speed, slow speed chase, right? And this guy pulls her over. She drives up the driveway of the house. Aaron comes out. What's going on? The guy's like, well, can I see your license and registration, please? License and registration. She goes, oh, I'm 14. He's like, so did you forget your license? I'm 14 years old. I don't have you don't have a license. He gave her a $50 ticket. Actually wrote it out and served her a $50 ticket. He's like, you don't have a license? This is like Paul Bart, mall cop, power gone to your head, crazy. My wife's like, wait, she's 14. He's like, she gets a ticket. It's like, dude, the things we do with the young. Oh, the young candidate, they're too young. And here's Eutychus, working all day, young kid, and he's tired, but he still wants to hear the Bible. He's jacked up. He leans in. He wants more of Bible, more Paul. And so what happens is he dies. He falls out the window, three stories, dead. So what happens? Paul goes down, throws himself on the young man and puts his arms around him. I love it. It's exactly what, by the way, why does Paul do this? Because he's been reading his Bible, and he knows it's exactly what Elijah and Elisha did as two separate prophets in 1 Kings and 2 Kings. Go read 1 2 Kings. Young kids die, and they go and they lay on them, and they pray, and the kid comes back to life. So Paul goes and does what he's read in the Bible, and he goes and does it. So he says, don't be alarmed. He's alive. And the kid, what? Then he went upstairs again, broke bread and ate, and after talking until daylight, he doesn't even stop at midnight. Kid dies, Paul goes down, the people took the young man home and were greatly comforted. It's almost like Paul raises the kid from the dead so that he can go back on talking. Now, this kid, Eutychus, very interesting. I was passing by this verse and I was just going to go on with it. But then I read a commentary and it said that the word or the name Eutychus means lucky. And he said, oftentimes in the Bible, a name starts to predict something about that person. And boy, Eutychus was lucky that day. As he fell out the window and he died, he happened to have the Apostle Paul say, okay, I got the power to come down and heal you. So then I was like, okay, that's great. Nothing there for this church. But then on Wednesday night, I went out for dinner with a guy. And he started talking to me about his call to become a youth pastor. And he was an entrepreneur, very successful and making money. And he was struggling with, should I become a youth pastor? Should I go into the world of actually loving on young people and teach them the Bible, whatever? And so he was struggling. And he read this book by a guy named Jamie Winship called Living Fearlessly. And in the book, Jamie Winship says this: sometimes in life, God speaks to you prophetically by you understanding your own name. And the guy said, well, that's a weird concept. And he went and he looked at his last name and he checked the etymology of it and what it meant. And literally what his last name meant was protector and one who raises up kids. And as he's struggling with a calling to a certain task, he looks at his own name and goes, oh my gosh, I am called to be a student pastor in my life. And he gave his life to it. Because sometimes, Jamie Winship says, God uses your name. Now, I don't want you to all start doing wizardry and trying to figure out, oh, what's God saying to me? But I did it. See, here's what happened. Yesterday, I hear that story on Wednesday, and I go, oh. And then I'm reading this, and I get across Eutychus, and Eutychus means lucky. And I think, I wonder if there's something here. And then I remembered him telling me that story, and then I said, well, what's my name? And so yesterday, I went on to ChatGPT, and I said, what does the name Mark Clark mean? And here's what ChatGPT said. The name Mark comes from the Latin term Marcus, name Marcus, which is believed to be derived from Mars, the Roman god of war. This gives the name connotations of strength, courage, and masculinity. So it didn't totally nail that, all right? However, the last name Clark comes from the Old English and Old French word clerk, which means scribe or cleric. It originally referred to a scholar or clergyman, someone who could read and write. Over time, the name became a common occupational surname for those who worked in religious roles like pastors. I mean, I don't know any scholars who like to be pastors. So here's the thing. I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my gosh, but wait a minute, I'm already this scholar pastor guy. That's already who I am. So who cares? I only figured this out on Saturday. But that's not the way it works. You see, sometimes, listen to me, sometimes God needs to speak to you so that you start doing things. Other times, he speaks to you to affirm what you're doing. Because sometimes I begin to doubt whether this should be my job. Do you know how many times business people have come to me and gone, you know what we notice about you? When you get in a room full of people, they listen to what you say and you can sell anything. That would probably work for my car company. You ever thought about going into selling cars? And then they slide a number across the table and my heart starts to beat and I'm tempted. And then God speaks and he says, no. You see, your last name is scholar pastor guy. You keep doing what you're doing. How many times in life, here's Eutychus, he needs to get, how many of you constantly are looking, God, I want you to speak to me. I want you to affirm what I'm doing. I want you to make sure that I'm not being tempted away toward this and this and this. And God shows up, he's like, hey, I'm giving you something. Now, you have to listen to it. You got to be obedient to it, but you got to listen. Okay, here's how this story ends. He goes down, he gets this guy alive, puts his arms around him, and the people are greatly comforted. Now, here's the big thing that I want you to get from this. The people are comforted, the people are inspired, the mission of the gospel goes forward in the world. Listen to me, not because of the preaching, but because of this interruption. Notice Luke always tells us what the content of the preaching was, right? Long sermons. You've gone through this 20 chapters, long sermons. Here's what Paul said, here's what Peter said, sermon. All of a sudden, he doesn't tell us what Paul said in the room. What he does tell us is about this kid who died. This, as I'm reading this, I'm going, listen, God speaks to us, listen to me, in the interruptions of life. How many of you this week went, I don't have time for this? This thing so I'm in my backyard. My dogs are back there and our fence had gone down. So I'm trying to work with my daughter to try to set up a cagey thing with our table. And I'm trying to get the dogs not to escape. And the dogs are barking and screaming. And I'm like, quiet, bring the dogs in. We're all yelling at each other. And right in that moment, I got to keep my dog in. This kid starts walking by our backyard. And he's got two dogs. So of course my dog's like, rah, 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 trying to get out. I'm like, get out of here. And the kid looks at me, he's like, Pastor Mark. I don't have time for this nonsense. dog's eating my hand. Yes. I climb up over the fence. Yes, young man, how are you today? I'm just doing my prayers out here. I just, what do you need? Don't have time for this. So, this is where my week landed. Friday, I look out of my window and I see on the back of my wife's car this paint blotch that I'd put there a few weeks ago. Big black smear of paint on her white car, and I can't get it off. So I called up my friend. I said, hey, you got a body shop thing. Can you help get this paint off? And he's like, yeah, sure. Which store do you want to go to? This one or this one? I said, I'll go to that one. He's like, okay, good. That's where the one I'm at. Come, I'll take it out. Okay, great. So I get in my wife's car and I drive there on Friday. As I get there, I drop it off and the guy comes out. He's like, yeah, I'm going to get this blotch of paint off the back of your car. Great. And he looks up and he says, oh man, you have a blown tire right in her front tire. And I walk over, it's totally flat and it's got this big nail in it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got a sermon to write. I got pastoring to do. Now I got a nail in my tire. I hate life. And so the guy's like, well, let me get this blotch of paint off and then you can go get it fixed, but you have to get it fixed. You can't even get home. You got to go to America's Tire and get this thing fixed. I'm like, sure, whatever. So I look up America's Tire and I hit the Google. The first one I see, closest one, boom, it's right around the corner so the whole tire doesn't pop. And I drive to America's Tire, I pull up, and I walk in, there's 5 guys there, and one of them, I walk up to one, and one makes eye contact with me. How can I help you, sir? So I got a blown tire, I bring him out, bring him back into the computer. He says, what's your name? I tell him my name, I give him all my info. He says, okay, well, here's the thing, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a pastor. He's like, oh, really? Da-da-da. Start chatting a little bit. And then he orders me 2 front tires. He says, they're gonna be in tomorrow. So just come back tomorrow. I said, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. So I go home, he texts me in the morning, tires are ready, I get in the car, I'm driving, this is not a joke, I'm driving to America's Tire yesterday morning, and I said out loud to God, I don't have an illustration for a divine interruption, but I need one. I need you, because I'm preaching this sermon, and these people need to hear an illustration of a time when an interruption did something godly and good. And then I drove to America's Tire. And I pulled up, and he said, okay, I'll put your tires on. He puts the tires on, and I walk out, and he hands me the keys, and he says, have a good day. But before you go, I need to tell you something. I looked you up online last night, and I got to tell you, my wife and I have been going through a terrible time in life. Our kids are a disaster, and we're looking for any kind of hope that we can get. And I looked you up on YouTube, and I went and watched a sermon that you preached. Something about how to find joy in life. And I listened to it, the entire thing. And I realized that the only way to find joy in life is through the person and the work of Jesus. And I listened to that sermon as I drove home. And when I got home, I sat my wife down on a couch. And I sat beside her, and for an hour we sat and listen to you preach and give us hope that the only way to find joy is in Jesus, and I'm coming to your church this weekend. Listen, what are the things that need to happen? I need to look out my window on Friday. I need to make a decision to bring that in to get it fixed, and then I need to choose the right one to go to versus that one. And then when I get there, I got to see that the tires popped, and then I got to decide, well, I got to go to that America's Tire versus that one because that's 8 minutes away. And then when I walk in, it's got to be that guy. And in that moment, God says, none of this is interruptions. You think the important work is preaching your little sermons and getting your work done? No. All the interruptions are divine, because you've never met a person in your life that's not going to live forever. And everything about your life is about guiding them toward Jesus and not away from him. And in those moments, God takes all the normal things and goes, I'm going to use you as long as you're not afraid to lean in and meddle in other people's life, even in the mundane. So, Heavenly Father, I pray as we read stories like this, we would recognize that you are powerfully at work, not just 2,000 years ago. You are at work now, with all of us in this room, no matter what age and stage of life we are. And you want to use us for great things, for the good of the world and the glory of you, Jesus. We know that that's why you showed up here. You came and lived a perfect life because we could never live a perfect life. We are hypocrites. We are liars. We're sinners, but you died on that cross as an atoning sacrifice for our sin in our place. You rose again to give us the power of new life, where we could be animated by the power of the Spirit to do some of this stuff, that this isn't just a history book. This can be our life. And I pray that it is this week, that we would see the little miracles, even in the interruptions, that this room would be a room that stands up and walks out of here to live the rest of this story out for the good of the world, for your glory, because we know that's where life is. That's where peace is. That's where power is. Do that among us in Jesus' great name we pray. Amen. 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 Guys, thank you guys for being here. God bless you. And we'll see you next week. Have a great week. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching our Bayside online service. We're so glad that you're actually part of our church, which you are, even though you're watching from all over the world, and we have people literally watching from all over the world. You are part of our family, and we want to get to know you. So please make sure you get in touch with us. Let us know your story. We'd love to hear you and serve you in any way we can. Also, part of what drives the way we connect as a church globally is giving. And so if you're part of our family, we would love you to start giving to our church. Those resources, we steward them to reach people all over the world. And we hear amazing stories about what Jesus is doing with your resources. So if you already give, thank you. If not, you can start giving. We would love that. And then finally, we have all kinds of stuff we do. We have a podcast network. We have like 10 podcasts that address a whole bunch of different things in your life. So if you're a podcaster, join us in the Thrive Podcast Network. We'd love to serve you. We've got a ton of stuff there. We just want to make sure that you feel part of our family. So we love you. Thank you so much for being part of this family, and we will see you next week.